Should you plan on running paid ads to get your app's very first users? This is something a lot of our own entrepreneurs ask when they're preparing to launch their apps because running paid ads is a pretty normal thing. But honestly, sometimes the idea of paying to run ads to get those first users before you've launched your app, it can be a little bit intimidating. Thinking about spending all the money and the time to do that. Is it even going to work? Well, the reality is not everybody should be running paid ads. And if you are running them, you shouldn't run them at certain times in your app's launch. So if you've wondered this, stick around until the end because if you end up running paid ads, you need to know when they're going to be most beneficial for you. Hey, it's Kristen over at Coaching No Code Apps. We help non-technical entrepreneurs build custom apps so they can launch their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses all without coding. And if that's what you're doing, then subscribe to this channel for new videos to help you every single week. Okay, so here's the deal. There's not a black and white answer of whether you should or you shouldn't run ads. Shocker, but it really depends on your own situation, goals, and priorities. But before we dig into that, you have to understand some context around what your app's launch should look like and the different phases involved in that launch so you can know when to deploy ads if you end up doing so. And with that, let's jump over to the iPad here and we're going to sort of draw out what your app's launch phases will look like. So over at the bottom here, we have no app. Okay, so this is when you are in your app idea stage. You haven't even started development yet. And then over on the far end, we have the rollout stage. Now, this is when you are rolling out your more fleshed out product to your broader target market. This is no longer a pilot or a beta version app. This is a product that you're selling to your users on a wider scale. Okay, so we're going from having no app to having your app out there fully in the market. Now, when you are going from no app to having your app fully out there, you're not just going to launch your app one time. Realistically, you should have a series of softer launches that will take you along that path in the correct way. Now, this is important to understand because depending on which launch we're talking about in that series, that will dictate whether or not you should be using paid ads to get your users. So let's talk through what each of those launches is. So the very first launch you're going to have is your alpha launch. So when you start out with your app idea, you are going to be building the first version of your app. This is a very stripped back core product. And then you're going to put it through alpha testing. Alpha testing is purely for functionality. You're just testing to make sure your app functions as it should. When you're running through alpha testing, you're essentially bringing some external users on board to navigate through your app from start to finish and make sure they have found all of the bugs so that you can fix them before launching in the next stage. So after you have fixed up any of those bugs, which there will be some that you'll come across, you will make it to that next stage, which is your pilot launch. Now your pilot launch is different. This is when you are launching to prospective users within your actual target market, but you're not selling the app to them for them to use it on an ongoing basis in real life applications. For your pilot launch, you're actually just testing for product validation. So leading up to this point, you've had idea validation. That means you've identified a problem and you have an educated and ideally well-researched assumption that you can solve that problem with a core set of features. But up until this point, you're working on that assumption. So when you are going through your pilot launch, you're validating that assumption with the product itself. So you're taking users from your target market, putting them in your app, and confirming yes or no, this is the right product to solve this problem for this type of person. Now that doesn't mean, again, that you are putting it into their hands for them to use for the next 2 months in their real life applications. No, this could even be a closed pilot test where you are just getting that product validation before you build on top of anything else. Because until you have that validation, you could be making even more assumptions and you could be leading yourself astray. Depending on whether or not you get that validation, that will determine how long it takes you to get to your next launch stage, which is your beta launch. Now, beta testing is different from pilot testing in that with beta testing, you are testing for adoption. So you are taking that validated product from your pilot testing and you are putting it into users' hands for them to use on an ongoing basis, on a day-to-day basis, in real life applications, and making sure they're able to adopt the product. So pilot testing is for product validation, beta testing is for product adoption. Okay, so those are two different things. Now, the caveat here is a pilot test can be a closed testing group where you bring users in, you test with them, you get the validation you need, and then you put the users back out where they came from. So they're not staying on board your app. You make any tweaks you need to, and then you bring users on board to be your beta testers and move forward from there. You can have your pilot testing group just kind of bleed into your beta testing group. So you bring the users on board, validate the product, and then validate the product adoption. Now, this really depends on your app's use case and your user base, but know there's a little bit of a differentiation that can happen between how one test moves into the next. Your beta testing process is going to take a little bit longer because when you're doing that, you actually have users on board the app. You're getting their feedback consistently as they continue using your app in real life applications. And this is where you start to tweak things like user experience, design, and things like that, because you want the product to stick, right? You want them to be able to easily adopt it so you can retain your users. Now, as you do that, you're kind of going to naturally move into this rollout stage. So unlike that potential closed pilot test where you might bring people in, test, and then move them back out, you're not going to generally close off your app after beta testing and then go out and roll out the app, unless you really need to make significant pivots or adjustments, right? Assuming you don't need to do that, then your beta testing is kind of going to roll out, and then you'll start to scale on top of the product that has been validated through pilot testing and that is adoptable and where you have honed in on user retention, right? You're going to start expanding on top of that as you go into that rollout phase. Now the question is, when should you be using paid ads, if you even should be in the first place? So to answer that, let's go back and look at our launch phases. So with your alpha testing and your alpha launch phase, you should not need to run paid ads to get these alpha test users on board your app. If you're building an app, it's for an industry that you should have expertise and knowledge on, and that you should have connections within. And your alpha test users can be a handful of people who come on board and just navigate your app from point A to point B or from start to finish, ideally on different devices or different screen sizes if your app is being built for different screen sizes. Because the thing is, no matter how much you test your app, you're always going to miss bugs because you've built your app. You know it like the back of your hand, or at least you will. And so you know intuitively how it should be navigated. External users don't. So they're always going to do things that you don't anticipate, and they're always going to bring up bugs. Now, your app should not be perfect for your alpha test users. That's not the point of them, right? You're not launching the app to them so that they can pay you and be retained and you could start growing your user base. No, the purpose of them is to make sure that your app is not buggy when you do launch it to those people. Okay, so this is not something that you need to go and market. This is the type of user where you should be able to tap into your existing contacts and just have them come in, use the app, and help you pinpoint any of those bugs and issues so that when you roll the app out further, they're all cleared up. That leads us into the pilot launch. Should you run paid ads to get those pilot test users? This is a similar situation where Ideally, you should have direct access points to prospective users within your target market where you can reach out and do a little boots on the ground work and bring pilot users in without having to run paid ads. Now, some people are going to argue me on this and they're going to say you should always run paid ads because you can get your users faster. Here's the thing to understand when you're doing your pilot launch and pilot testing. When you launch a pilot version of your app, the goal is to get product validation. Now, along with that product validation, you're also going to be getting validation for your initial messaging that will help with your marketing and your sales and your user conversion. You're also going to get validation that you are, in fact, identifying the exact right user within your segment of the target market. You're also, of course, going to be validating that the feature set you've built those are the right features to solve the problem that your app has been designed to solve. Now, if you run paid ads to bring users on board to an app that has none of those things validated, then you are going to be paying to run through that process, right? You're going to be paying to see whether you can figure out what messaging is going to convert users, because that's what's going to be on the ad, right? You're going to be trying to convert users from the ad, but you're not going to be able to use any validated messaging. So you're going to be paying to test your messaging. When you pay to test your messaging, you're going to bring those users on board and you're going to be paying to test the feature set. Right? You're going to be paying to run through these different steps of your validation. Now, you can do that. And again, some people will argue and say you should do that. And if you really want to try to move faster and you have a lot of money to spend on research and development, because paid ads just aren't cheap, especially when a lot of the conversions are going to be throwaway conversions, because this is very initial testing, right? If you have the money and you want to spend it on that type of research and development, you can. I personally would, at this stage, just use a little bit of elbow grease, put some sweat equity into it, and just have some conversations with prospective users who are within your target market who you already have access to. And again, you should have access points that you can come up with. People who you know, contacts, coworkers, colleagues, people in your community, people in social groups, right? You should be able to do some unscalable things, have conversations, send emails, send messages, and get an initial group of pilot users on board without having to pay for them. Now, by doing that, you can validate your app through some unscalable practices, sure, but in my opinion, that's okay in the beginning. And once you get that validation, then when you do run paid ads, you're actually paying for messaging that you've validated, right? You're actually paying to bring users into an app that you've already validated. So when you get the validation, then you can scale on top of it. Okay, now what about the beta stage? Should you run paid ads here? Well, maybe. This is where we get a little bit warmer, a little bit closer to more of a hard yes. The thing to understand about beta testing is in this stage, you are still testing, right? At that point, you have product validation, and that's huge. You need to get that under your belt. But when you're beta testing, you are still testing for adoption. So when you're beta testing, you might have, or at least you should have, more valid messaging, right? If you've been able to convert people into being pilot test users, you should be able to understand what type of messaging, the conversations, the emails, the social media posts, whatever it may be, you should be able to understand which ones work better than others. Okay, so you've validated some of your initial messaging, you've validated your feature set, right? You've validated that you've built the right features for the right person to solve the right problem. Okay, so you have all of that. What you don't have when you're beta testing is the stickiness, right? You don't have the adoption yet. When you're beta testing, you are making sure that users can adopt the app, use it in real life applications consistently, more frequently, and that they want to continue using it. Okay, so that's when you're really looking at how do I keep the users in the app and retain them and keep them over the long run. So if you run ads, paid ads to bring beta users in, you're still going to be experiencing a higher churn rate with your users than you want. You're going to be having users come on board and more users leave or stop using the app because your app is not going to be sticky just yet. Okay, so you can start running ads, but a lot of that's going to be throwaway. Okay, it's going to be bringing more people in so you can speed up that testing process, because the more people who go through your testing, generally, right, the more data you're going to have, the easier your time you're going to have making decisions. Now, you don't have to run paid ads here. If you have other access points to your market, and again, ideally you do, you can do lots of other things. You can still do these more unscalable practices to get these early beta users and get the rest of that initial validation. And that is going to lead us into this rollout stage where you're really just rolling out the fully validated product to your broader target market. Now, what does this mean, rolling out the app to the broader target market? Well, really, what you're going to be doing is taking the product, the messaging, the retention strategies, everything you've built during this testing process, and now you're going to be scaling on top of it. You've validated your feature set. Okay, now let's scale on top of that. You've validated your messaging. Now let's scale that messaging so you no longer have to have these kind of like boots on the ground, more manual conversations that really just aren't doable at scale, right? So when you're rolling out, that's when you can really leverage things like paid ads, because you have that validation, you know what to say, you know when you pay for a user and they come in, you're going to be able to convert them, you're going to be able to retain them, so you know you're going to get the return on your ad spend that's worthwhile for you. Now, do you have to run ads? No, you certainly don't have to, but here's the thing to understand when you're paying to acquire your users. When you pay more money, you're going to be able to move faster. When you pay less money or no money, you're going to move more slowly. That might seem like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you want to move more quickly? But it's not always as black and white as it might seem. All right, if you really want to move quickly, you can leverage paid ads in situations where maybe you are building the app specifically so you can exit the app. You want to build a product, you want to put some initial sweat equity and some money into it, and you want to slap a valuation on it so that you can just get out and move on to the next thing. Okay, in that case, you're not going to want to spend the next year, 2 years, 3 years growing this sustainable business for yourself. You just want to, put it on steroids, really, grow it and be able to sell it. Or let's say you are neck and neck with a competitor. There's another app that's exactly like yours and you're trying to take your market share. Well, if you're running paid ads, then you can move more quickly, right? Let's say there's 2 apps that are just going on the exact same path. Well, the one that can spend more money to acquire users is the one that's going to end up with more of that market share, right? At that point, it's just who can spend more money. Okay, so if you really want the speed, those could be some reasons why. But then on the other hand, maybe the speed isn't really that big of a priority for you. Maybe you're just looking to build a more sustainable business for yourself, and you're not looking for this flashy exit, and you don't have this majorly competitive market where it's like cutthroat, right? Maybe you want to build sustainable user acquisition practices into your app and into your business that don't start with paid acquisition. Maybe you want to build up more presence in your market through organic channels. You can do that by having organic content marketing, or maybe you create joint ventures. There's lots of ways to acquire users that are going to take more time. They're going to be more manual, and it's going to be a little bit slower because they're manual. But when you build those things, you're building more sustainability into your business, because now you have user acquisition tactics that are built into your business that don't require you to just put more and more and more money into them in order for them to work. You can get them working, and then you can put paid ads on top of that. Now that creates a really balanced business, because if something is off with the organic marketing or the organic content marketing that you've created, well, maybe you can put a little bit more money into the ads to balance things out. Okay, so it's not always a black or white, yes, you should do it, no, you shouldn't. It really depends on you and what your goals are and the type of business you really want to build. So look back at this process and find where you are and when and where it might make sense to put some money into ads to acquire those users. Now, at the very beginning of this video, I mentioned that the entrepreneurs who we work with sometimes have this question or questions like these when they're preparing for their launches. And a lot of those entrepreneurs started by going through our free workshop over at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop to make sure that number one, they had validated their app idea. Number two, they had scoped that app idea correctly, because what you want to do is go through those initial validation stages as smoothly as you possibly can. The faster you go through those, the sooner you can start scaling. But you have to make sure you're building the right app, the right features for the right people, and launching all those right things at the right times. And this workshop that we've created will walk you through doing that. When you have those things in place, the launch process for your app becomes so much more straightforward. And when you decide to spend money on your ads, if you decide to, it's going to be a lot easier of a decision for you. So if you want to join in on that as well, you can head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop, and we'll hope to see you there. And hey, if you found this video helpful, if you could give it a like down below, we would really appreciate it. And we'll see you in the next one.